Some afternoons pass like the final breath of a season, quiet, unhurried, and full of longing. By the edge of a still lake, an old man sits alone, releasing paper boats into the water. Each boat carries a memory, a word left unsaid, a promise never kept. Then came a boy. He knew nothing of war, or loss, or regret. But he knew how to listen. And through listening, two souls, divided by a lifetime, began to find each other. Through stories. Through silence. Through the simple act of folding paper. The Man in the Paper Boat is more than a tale of an old man and a child. It is a journey through memory, grief, forgiveness, and the fragile thread of human connection. It is a story for those who have ever lost time, loved ones, or even themselves. And for those who still believe that, even late in life, love, healing, and hope can still arrive, just in time. Morning at Luan Van Lake always carried a slight chill, with mist clinging gently to lotus leaves and delicate flowers blooming quietly along the shore. The small lake was mostly forgotten, hidden in a sleepy town where time moved slowly. But to old Manon, it was part of his breath, the place where he laid down his soul in the twilight of his years. Every morning, he would appear by the lake, silently folding a paper boat with trembling but determined hands. He would carefully place the boat onto the surface of the water as if entrusting it with a message, letting the current carry it away. At first, no one paid attention. The lake had few visitors. Occasionally, some neighborhood children ran by on their way to school, but never lingered. However, the way the old man sat silently for hours after releasing his boat caught the eye of a curious boy named Hung. Hung was a curious, observant child. At 10 years old, he enjoyed wandering alone, fishing, and playing in the dirt. That day, while scavenging for discarded bottles, he noticed the old man folding a boat, releasing it, and then staring after it in complete stillness. That simple act stirred a sense of wonder and vague familiarity in Hung. In the following days, Hung began visiting the lake more frequently. At first, he watched from afar. Then he made excuses, pretending to look for worms or dig near the bank, just to be closer. The old man remained silent, eyes distant, as if looking not at the lake, but through it, into a distant past. "Why do you fold boats, sir?" Hung finally asked. The old man didn't reply or turn around. But Hung sensed he had been heard. The next morning, after setting a boat adrift, the old man left a blank piece of paper on the stone bench. Hung rushed over and picked it up. On it was written, "The boat carries an apology." From that day forward, Hung began sitting nearby, watching the old man fold boats. He also tried to fold his own. His first few were crooked and lopsided. The old man would quietly show him how to crease the folds, without saying much. Time passed quietly. Sometimes, closeness doesn't need many words. Every morning, two silhouettes appeared by the lake, one old, one young. Two generations, two kinds of silence, but with each passing day, they understood each other a little more. And the paper boats continued to drift gently away, carrying something unspoken, something unnamed, into the still water. Summer stretched lazily over the town, and the days grew longer. Birds nested in the reeds by the lake, cicadas buzzed from tall grass, and Hung's visits became a ritual. His mother had begun to notice. "Where are you off to so early?" she would ask. "To the lake," Hung replied. She never asked more. Perhaps she remembered being young and needing silence. One morning, Hung arrived earlier than usual. He found the old man already seated, gazing at the water. But that day, something was different. There was no boat in his hand, no paper in his lap. Just a distant, almost pained expression in his eyes. Hung sat beside him quietly. After a while, the old man spoke, his voice hoarse like dried leaves in the wind. "Do you know what guilt feels like, boy?" Hung thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Like when you break something and lie about it?" The old man didn't smile. He nodded, slowly. "Sometimes guilt is heavier than a stone, and quieter than a whisper. It stays in you." 4 decades. Hung didn't understand the depth of the words, but he felt them settle into the morning air. That day, the old man finally told him a name. Kai, he whispered. His name was Kai. My friend. My brother. It was the first time Hung heard the old man speak more than a sentence. He didn't interrupt. We made boats together as boys. Paper, banana leaves, even wooden ones. We raced them on this very lake. He paused. Then the war came. Hung held his breath. We promised we'd stay together. That we'd come home together. But I made it back, and Kai didn't. His eyes clouded. It was my fault. Hung looked at him, wide-eyed. Did you leave him? I did worse. I chose silence. I watched something happen and said nothing. I thought I was protecting him. But I betrayed him. Hung didn't speak. He only sat, his little fingers picking at blades of grass. The old man sighed. These boats, they're for him. Each one is an apology. I've folded hundreds, maybe thousands. But I still don't know if any of them have reached him. Hung didn't know how to comfort an old man with a broken past. But he did something small. He took the sheet of paper from his own bag, folded it carefully, then handed it over. Maybe this one will, he said simply. The old man took it with a surprised look. Side by side, they released the boat into the water. It drifted slowly, catching the sunlight. And for the first time, a faint smile curved on Old Man Ann's lips. The rains came early that year, draping the lake in a veil of silver threads. Drops rippled on the water's surface, distorting reflections of trees and sky. But neither the rain nor the wind kept Hung away. He now came with an umbrella and a plastic bag to protect the paper. Old Man Ann waited, already soaked despite his straw hat. In his lap lay a thick envelope, yellowed at the corners. You're wet, Hung said. So is memory, and replied with the ghost of a grin. It leaks through the cracks. Hung sat beside him, opening the umbrella above them both. The old man handed him the envelope. Letters, he said. Ones I never sent. To Kai's family. To his sister. Hung turned the envelope over in his hands. Why didn't you? I was a coward. I told myself silence was mercy. But really, I was hiding. Inside were sheets of paper, each marked with the same fine, trembling script. Some started with apologies. Others with stories. All of them were soaked in the ink of regret. And took out one and read. Dear Lon, I held your brother's hand when the mortar landed. I want to believe he didn't feel the pain. Only the warmth of a promise kept. But I failed him. Hung listened in silence, the rain blurring the world around them. You should send them, Hung said. To who? They've probably all moved on. Or passed. What good are these now? Hung looked at the lake. You keep sending boats. Maybe these letters are just heavier boats. But they still need water. And was quiet for a long time. Then he tucked the envelope back under his coat. Maybe someday, he whispered. The next morning, Hung brought paper of his own. Colored, bright sheets his mother had used for origami. Together, they folded boats again, but this time, on each boat, Hung scribbled short notes, peace, friendship, truth. Words float, he said. You told me that. And chuckled softly. I said they sink. Then we'll fold them tighter, Hung replied. As they released the colorful fleet onto the lake, even the rain seemed gentler, less a burden, more a blessing. The boats swayed and twirled like dancers, carrying with them pieces of two hearts, one old, one young, both learning how to let go. It was a crisp morning when they noticed her. A woman in her 60s, wrapped in a pale green scarf, stood across the lake under the shade of an old tamarind tree. She didn't move, only watched. Ann's fingers froze mid-fold. Hung followed his gaze. Do you know her? Hung asked. And nodded slowly, as if recognizing a ghost. Lon, he whispered. Kai's sister. Hung's eyes widened. From the letters? And didn't answer. He stood up for the first time in weeks without groaning. He walked toward her, paper boat still in hand. Lon met him halfway. Her face was unreadable, lines of time carved deeply but gracefully. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. "I wasn't sure it was you," she said. "I wasn't sure I could still be seen," and replied. Silence lingered between them, like wind brushing against dry leaves. Lon held out a small box wrapped in faded silk. "Kai kept this with him. I thought, maybe you should have it." Hands trembling, and opened it. Inside was a wooden toy boat, worn from years, carved with both their initials, A+K. "I thought it was lost," and said, voice breaking. "It was the only thing returned to us," Lon said. "No letter. No words. Just this." Hung stood a few steps behind, watching. He felt like a witness to something sacred. "I've written you letters," and said. "Too many. Never sent." "I know," Lon replied. "I read one. The wind brought it to my door last autumn. Wet, barely legible. But it reached." And looked up, startled. "Sometimes the water carries what the heart can't," she added. The two stood together by the lake, old pain slowly softening between them. Hung approached and gently offered Lon a folded paper boat with the word remembrance written in blue crayon. She took it, eyes misting. "Thank you, little one." They released the boat together, and it drifted toward the horizon where sky and water blurred, a small vessel carrying peace. For the first time in decades, and didn't fold another boat that day. He just stood quietly, holding the wooden one from the box, as if something had finally come full circle. And from the opposite bank, where old trees stood watch, the lake seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if it too had forgiven something long buried beneath its calm surface. Autumn gave way to winter. The golden hues faded into grays, and the lake turned still. Hung still came every morning, sometimes with a folded boat, sometimes just with silence. The bench remained a sacred place, though now only one silhouette sat there. The absence of Old Man and felt heavier than the cold air. But Hung was no longer just a boy. He started bringing a small notebook with him, jotting thoughts, sketches, and memories of the times he'd shared with him. The habit grew from a whisper to a calling. At home, he'd stay up late, writing by candlelight, recreating their conversations, the folds of the boats, the gentle rustle of the wind. One day, his mother found the notebook. "Is this about your old friend?" Hung nodded. She smiled softly. "You've always had his spirit. Gentle. Patient. Thoughtful. Maybe these stories need to be shared." Hung hesitated. The idea of sharing something so personal seemed like exposing a wound still healing. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt right. Not as a tribute, but as a continuation. So he wrote. Each chapter was a paper boat. Each word a folded memory. The first person he shared the writing with was Lon. He visited her one chilly morning, carrying the small bundle of pages tied with twine. She welcomed him into her home, an old wooden house filled with plants, books, and photographs. She took the bundle gently and ran her hand over the top page. "Is it about him?" "About both of you," Hung said. "And the lake. And the boats." She read in silence for a long time. Hung sat on a cushion by the window, watching light filter through the leaves of a potted bougainvillea. When she finished, she wiped a tear and smiled. He would have hated it. Too many feelings. Hung laughed. He hated when I asked questions. But he always answered. Just quietly. Lon touched his hand. "You're more than a boy who watched an old man fold boats. You're the bridge. Between then and now." Months passed. Hung submitted a few stories to the town newsletter. Then to a local literary contest. By the following year, a small publisher in Saigon picked up the manuscript. The book, titled The Man and the Paper Boat, was printed in a modest first edition. It didn't become a bestseller. But it became something more, a story that lived. People in the village began to visit the lake again. Children folded boats, some in tribute, some out of curiosity. A small plaque was placed near the bench. To those we remember. And those who helped us remember. Hung stood by that plaque the day it was unveiled. Lon beside him. A quiet breeze stirred the water. And he realized then that grief doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the lake, part of the current. You don't forget. You fold it, release it, and let it drift. Over and over. One morning, a young boy approached Hung. "Why do you sit here every day?" Hung smiled. "To remember someone." "Someone you miss?" Hung nodded. "And someone I found." The boy offered him a crooked paper boat. "Want to race?" Hung took the boat, chuckled, and nodded. They released it together. And as the boats floated side by side, he thought of Kai, of Lon, of all the memories carried by the lake. The past didn't drown. It sailed. Carried by paper and love. 2 years after the release of The Man and the Paper Boat, something extraordinary began to unfold in the quiet lakeside town. What began as a simple story had grown into whispers, then conversations, and finally, a movement. Visitors started arriving, not in large tourist waves, but in gentle streams, teachers, veterans, writers, and wanderers who had read the book and were touched by its quiet power. One of them was Mai, a young curator from a museum in Da Nang. She came to Hung one early spring morning while he was sweeping leaves from the path near the bench. "Are you the boy who wrote the book?" she asked. Hung smiled, brushing his hair from his eyes. "I was the boy. I guess now I'm just the man by the bench." "I read it during a long train ride," Mai said. "It stayed with me. I couldn't stop thinking about the boats, the lake, and you. I think this story should have a home." Hung raised an eyebrow. "It does. Here. On this bench." Mai shook her head gently. "I mean a place where people can see it, feel it. An exhibit. Maybe a small museum. Not just about but about memories. War. Healing. Intergenerational friendship. Your story is more than a memoir, it's a mirror." Hung was quiet for a moment. The idea felt too large, too grand. And would have scoffed at it. But then again, maybe that was why it mattered. "Come," he said. "I'll show you the lake." They walked the perimeter slowly. He showed her the places where the boats were folded. The tamarind tree where Lon first stood. The stone bench that had never once been moved. As Mai listened, her notebook filled with sketches, phrases, and notes. "What if the museum itself floats?" she asked suddenly. "Floats?" Hung echoed. "A floating museum. Built on the lake. Like a series of rafts connected by wooden paths. Symbolic, of course. Boats. Water. Memory drifting yet anchored." Hung's eyes widened. It was absurd. And perfect. The project began quietly. Hung and Mai gathered help from local carpenters, artists, and even former soldiers who felt the power of the story. Donations trickled in. Lon offered photographs of Kai, even one of the carved toy boat that had been returned. They called it the Floating Museum of Paper and Memory. The first structure built was the Room of Boats, a gently swaying platform lined with hundreds of paper boats suspended from the ceiling. Each boat bore a message from a visitor. Some were apologies. Others were memories. A few were blank, like Anne's first message to Hung. Next came the letters room, where copies of Anne's unsent letters were displayed alongside interactive screens. People could write their own letters to those they'd lost. There was a bin filled with paper and pens. Every week, Hung would read a few aloud at small evening gatherings under lantern light. There was also a corner dedicated to Lon and Kai, a quiet place with recordings of Lan's reflections, photographs of her family, and a restored version of the wooden toy boat with a +K carved into the side. Hung contributed a simple installation, his original notebook, now encased in glass, open to the first page he ever wrote about it. I didn't understand him, but I followed the boats. The museum became a gathering place not only for remembering war, but for understanding peace. Veterans brought their grandchildren. Students interviewed their elders. Artists came to draw. Musicians wrote songs inspired by the paper boats. Hung found himself busier than ever. He gave talks, folded boats with children, and answered letters sent to the museum from all over the world. People shared their griefs and questions, hoping for healing. Yet sometimes, when the sun set and the lake turned to gold, Hung would sneak away to the quiet bench where it all began. He still carried paper. Still folded boats. Still released them. Not out of grief anymore, but gratitude. One morning, Hung found a boat already placed on the water before him. It was neatly folded, made of soft brown paper, and bore the name, For Hung. He retrieved it carefully. Inside was a note. I never met him. But through your words, I felt like I had. Thank you for keeping him alive. My grandfather cried when he read your book. He said he too had a friend he never said goodbye to. He folded a boat that night. And smiled. Hung felt tears prick his eyes. The ripples were wider than he ever imagined. One rainy day, as Hung stood at the museum's entrance, he was approached by a tall man in his late 60s. He wore a worn cap and held an umbrella against the drizzle. You're Hung? Yes. I knew Kai. We were in the same unit. I've carried stories I never told. I think I'm ready now. Hung led him inside. The man sat before the wall of letters and read every one of Anne's words. Then he sat down at the table and began writing. His hand trembled. His face was wet. But his back was straight. That evening, Hung added a new section to the wall. A plaque that read, "Some stories arrive late, but they still arrive." In time, the floating museum was recognized by national media. Journalists wrote about it. A documentary crew filmed a short piece that won awards. Schools organized field trips. Healing was no longer a silent ritual, it became communal. Lon passed away quietly one morning, holding the wooden boat. Her ashes were scattered in the lake she had returned to. Hung folded a single boat that day, painted green like her scarf, and released it with a whisper. For Lon. For all the sisters who waited. 10 years passed. Hung's hair grayed at the temples. Children now called him Uncle Hung with affection. The museum expanded slightly, but the heart of it remained the same: paper, memory, and water. He never stopped writing. His second book, Letters Never Sent, compiled hundreds of anonymous letters from visitors, each one a paper boat in literary form. It became a national sensation. One afternoon, a group of children arrived for a workshop. Hung asked, "Do you know why we fold boats?" A girl raised her hand. "To carry feelings we can't say out loud." He smiled. Exactly. They folded boats together. One wrote, "I miss my dad." Another, "I'm sorry, Grandma." Hung watched the boats float across the lake, and for a moment, he saw a younger version of himself beside a quiet old man, both watching the water with wonder. Late that night, long after everyone had left, Hung walked to the bench. He sat, folded a final boat for the day, and whispered, "For you, then. It keeps going." He placed it on the lake. It caught the moonlight and drifted gently into the dark.